We're going to be in Genesis 31 today. Yesterday, I was doing what I do almost every single Saturday, taking a really long walk. Went on a 5-mile walk yesterday, just praying. And when I do that, I think a lot of you know what I'm really hoping for on those walks. I love eagles, and not the eagles. I mean, they're not bad, but eagles, and especially of the bald variety. And I just go into an area where I tend to see them. Yesterday, I was walking. I forgot my sunglasses. I also forgot sunscreen. But I got out there, and it was like noon. I'm out in a field, and I look up, and I can see there's an adolescent bald eagle that's like flying up above me. And I was trying for a little bit to see it, but it's noon. So where's the sun? And where's this eagle flying? I wanted to look directly at it, and that's where the beauty and the excitement is for me, to watch them fly and to see this. But I just couldn't because of that sun up there. I mean, who decided to put that up there? And so I was a little bit bummed for just a few seconds and looked down and just started walking. And then I settled for something else that wasn't quite what I was hoping for, but at the same time was incredibly beautiful. Because the angle of the sun and where that eagle was, I got to watch its shadow. And even that was an incredible experience, just walking and just seeing this eagle and watching its huge shadow as it's soaring around. And even that was just incredibly beautiful. You're like, what does that have to do with the sermon? Absolutely nothing. I just thought it was a cool story. No, it does. It'll connect. Trust me. I think it's one of those things. I'm saying this because I'm viewing it sort of that way as we look at Genesis 31 today. In my personality, my tendencies, I'm a big picture person. I see patterns in big ways. I'm forward-thinking, visionary. And that's just how I tend to roll. Like, I'm a drummer, and when I play music, I don't just play a part of a song. I play the whole song. I see the flow of the entire thing, not just this fill here and that fill there. When I interpret the Bible, when I look at the Bible, I really like to look at texts on how they fit together with the Bible as the whole and see them in a very broad sense. And I think that's good to do, but a lot of times there are other layers within texts, and looking at a text all on its own, you can also see a different application that is equally important for us to look at. So as I read this text today, I want to just move through it. This is a long text, and we're going to move quickly through this story in chapter 31. And when we get to the end of it, I want to briefly tell you this story in the context of the Bible, why it's being written that way, but then let's kind of set that aside, looking at the eagle up there, and focus instead on the shadow, okay? And instead, look at something that I think is incredibly applicable for many of you today. So this is what we read in Genesis 31, starting at verse 1. Now Jacob heard the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's, he has gained all this wealth. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was, and said to them, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. If you're in your own Bible or taking notes, underline that part right there. He has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not permit him to harm me. If he said, the spotted goats, okay, that's what we're talking about, the spotted goats, shall be your wages, then all the flock bore spotted, And if he said, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock bore striped. Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob, and I said, here I am. And he said, lift up your eyes and see all the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise, go out from this land, and return to the land of your kindred. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. I'm not going to be able to go back and explain all of this. And if you haven't been with us for the last few weeks at church, or you're not familiar with this story, you might be a little bit lost. And I would encourage you to go back and read, maybe Genesis 28 up to 31 today, and it'll make a lot more sense to you. I apologize that I can't do that, but it's such a big section that we're moving through. To summarize it, you basically have Jacob, who is staying in a land that is not his home. He is staying with his father-in-law. He has 2 wives. He has 11 sons and 1 daughter. And throughout almost 20 years of living with his father-in-law, he has been cheated by his father-in-law over and over and over again. In fact, when you look at this in the previous stories, we saw that there was a fight going on within the family, that Jacob's 2 wives, Leah and Rachel, were constantly butting heads and fighting, and then servant women got into it, and it just became this muddy mess within this family. But for the first time in this story, in chapter 31, we are actually seeing unity in the family. For the first time, they're agreeing on something. And what is that? They're agreeing that Laban, their father or father-in-law, has cheated them, has stolen from them. He's done all this. In fact, you see this with Leah and Rachel. These quotes from them. Is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. What money? What money? We haven't read about money. In these days, what would happen when a man wanted to marry a woman is he would come to the woman's father and give a dowry. You give a dowry. Might be, a lot of money. It might be cattle. It might be some other possessions. And that money wasn't supposed to be used for the father to enrich himself. That money was supposed to be set aside for the daughter in case her husband died and she was a widow. She then had money set aside or cattle set aside, something set aside so that she could live on it. Or in case the husband just no longer wanted her and cast her aside, that she wouldn't be homeless. When Jacob came to Laban, he didn't have anything except time. And that's why he worked for 7 years for one wife and 7 years for the other. He didn't take the wages himself. Instead, everything that he was earning went to Laban as a dowry. But what they are saying here is that Laban didn't set aside 14 years of wages for his daughters in case something happened. Instead, Laban took all of that money and tried to spend it to enrich himself. So you see this, not only did he basically sell off his daughters, he took all their dowry, so they know if something happens to Jacob, we're toast. I mean, we're either going to die in the desert, or we're going to end up slaves, or we're going to end up prostitutes. That's the only options at this time. What has he done to his own daughters? And you see with his son-in-law, he has changed his wages 10 times. Every time Jacob started to get ahead and started to get more cattle, more goats that would be his in the herds, Laban would change the deal on him, constantly breaking the deal and reorganizing things. And it's to a point where they are frustrated, they're seeing what's happening, but also note that God sees the abuse that is taking place by this man, Laban. And he acts. And you can sum up what he says in 2 words. Arise, go. Arise, go. God sees the situation and tells them, get out of there. This isn't where I want you. I want you to go to the place that is your actual home. Verse 17, we read this. So Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels. He drove away all his livestock, all his property that he had gained, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Paddan Aram, to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. And Jacob tricked Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he intended to flee. He fled with all that he had and arose and crossed the Euphrates. Underline that if you're taking notes. He crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. When it was told Laban on the 3rd day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsman with him and pursued him for 7 days and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said to him, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. So in this story, just to recap what I just read, Jacob takes his wives, his 11 sons, his 1 daughter, puts them all on camels, and it's like, let's get out of here, right? He's a good dad, a good husband. Camels in those days, those were the Mercedes. And he basically like, you get the comfort, get out of here. And he takes the rest of his herds, servants, everything. He's like, let's go. We're getting out of here while Laban is gone. That verse 24 is very interesting that God spoke to Laban, the Aramean. Note that this is the first time in these stories where Laban is being called more than once the Aramean, and it's a point that the writer, Moses, is trying to say he is not Jewish, he's not one of the Hebrew children, he is from a different group of people, and there's a difference happening here. In fact, we'll see that later on at the end of the story, where both Jacob and Laban give a name to the place where they are, and one gives the name in Aramaic, and the other one gives the name in Hebrew. Interesting, though, this is a man who's corrupt, this is a man who's abusive, and yet, when you look at it, God speaks to him. God speaks to him, which means this: just because God speaks to somebody doesn't mean that they are this perfect, holy, righteous person. God speaks to whoever he wants to speak, and he says whatever he wants to say. I think a lot of times in our view of God, we put him in these boxes to say he can only operate like this or he can only operate like that. Don't do that. And don't just assume if somebody is hearing a word from the Lord that means that this is somebody who was called to some place of great respect for their righteousness. Not so, not so. I mean, if you want to read further in these stories, you end up finding he even speaks through donkeys. So be careful with that. Verse 25, Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen pitched tents in the hill country of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done, that you have tricked me and driven away my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and trick me and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with mirth and songs, with tambourines and electric guitars?" Verse 28, "And why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell?" Interesting, to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell. "Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm, but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.'" Kind of ironic that he's saying that, because as he's saying that, what is he doing? Breaking that command. Verse 30, "And now you have gone away because you long greatly for your father's house, but why did you steal my gods?" Jacob answered and said to Laban, "Because I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force. Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have that is yours, and take it." Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the tent of the two female servants, but he did not find them. And he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle, and she sat on them. Laban felt all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, "Let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me." So he searched, but did not find the household gods. Okay, summarize what we just read. Laban catches up to Jacob, and he's angry. He's angry at this whole scenario and the whole situation. And if you notice, I was trying to emphasize it in the language. When he gets there, there's a lot of you and me talk over and over again. He's mad at Jacob, and he's blaming Jacob for this entire situation. Why is it that you just ran off so that I couldn't celebrate you leaving? Why is it that you didn't allow me to kiss my sons? Whose sons were they? Jacob's, right? They were Jacob's sons, not his. Why is it that you did this? You ran off, and it's like you just kidnapped my daughters at the sword. Is that how this happened? I mean, was this 7 brides for 7 brothers? No. I mean, and some of you are like, what's that? Great movie from like 100 years ago. You look at it, and it's just this thing where he is playing the blame game. Everything is Jacob's fault. But as we move further in the story, we start to find what he is actually angry about. With his mouth, he is saying these things, blaming Jacob and saying, like, why would you just leave so I couldn't celebrate, so I couldn't say goodbye? Why did you do this to my family? What he cares about, though, isn't those things. That's why there's a but in his statement. You ever had people tell you that? Like when someone's talking to you and apologizing or saying something, everything that happens before the but you can ignore. It's what's after the but that matters. If you look at Laban's entire statement, that is actually what he is concerned about. He's concerned about the fact that somebody stole his household gods. Why? Well, it's a little bit odd when we read this, and it doesn't necessarily make sense to us and our circumstances. And I think there's a couple ways you can interpret that. That name for household gods is teraphim. And what are teraphim? They're basically little statues. And sometimes it's translated idols. And it was these little idols that people would have, a family or a clan would somewhere have little statues or idols that they would worship. Now, the way most people have interpreted this, trying to figure it out, why did she steal them, have come up with a main reason. And note that the text doesn't say why exactly. All we know from the text is she took them and she hid them, and that Laban really wants them back. I think one way, the traditional way of looking at it, could be the way to interpret it, that she really was stealing these idols so that she could pray to them and worship them. It could be the case, because we know that idolatry is something that was practiced in this day. We see even in the New Testament, idolatry is something that is practiced, and it's something that the New Testament church is having to combat. And even today, idolatry still takes place, even within the church. It could be that she was just so much entrenched in that culture and that worldview of multiple gods, and that she was thinking, I'm going to take these with me and pray to them so I will be blessed. It's possible, because it's not going to be till the next couple chapters where you truly see Jacob's family turn and really start serving the Lord. But there's another way to look at that I think actually fits with the text. There was an archaeological discovery several years ago that was dated back to close to this time in the Middle East. And it was basically a series of laws. And what it said was that the person in the family who possessed the teraphim, the household gods, that was the person who had the control of all of the wealth, the money, the flocks, the herds of that family. Okay? They basically were like the executor of the state. Whoever had the teraphim. And in context, I think that makes a whole lot of sense. We don't know, because it wasn't in Israel that these were found, but it dates back to about the same time in the Middle East. And basically, a lot of the practices and laws were common in different communities back then. I think that makes a lot more sense of why Laban so badly is coming after them. Because those teraphim, those household idols, would be his to claim to say, I'm the one in charge of the wealth. Notice even with Rachel, before this earlier on, they're saying, our father has taken everything from us. So probably as she was leaving, that's why she's taking these. Not even in some vindictive thing, but to say, we're leaving and my husband has his stuff, but we need this as well. Either way, she's hidden these things. And this is the thing that her dad, Laban, really wants. He wants those teraphim. Verse 36, then Jacob became angry and he berated Laban. Jacob said to Laban, what is my offense and what is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? For you have felt through all my goods. What have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us two. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, and I have eaten the rams, and I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. What was torn by wild beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was, by day the heat consumed me, and the cold by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I have been in your house. I have served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. Verse 42, if the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night. Don't you love this? This guy should run for president. Verse 43. Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, the daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day for these, my daughters, or for their children whom they have borne? Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar, and Jacob said to his kinsmen, gather stones. And they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jegur Shahadutha, but Jacob called it Galeed. Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. Therefore, he named it Galeed and Mizpah, for he said, the Lord watch between you and me when we are out of one another's sight. If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no one is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. Then Laban said to Jacob, see this heap and the pillar which I have set between you and me? This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and you will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me to do harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor and the God of their father judge between us. So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. And Jacob offered a sacrifice in the hill country and called his kinsmen to eat bread. They ate bread and spent the night in the hill country. Early in the morning, Laban arose, kissed his grandchildren and his daughters, and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned home. Eagle, shadow of the eagle. Looking at this from a big view of what is being communicated here in the context, we need to remember that Genesis is being written by Moses while the children of Israel are traveling in the desert. And that's pretty incredible. What we are reading here is being communicated right then and there in that desert to the children of Israel who have fled Egypt. And if you look at it, there's parallels happening in these stories. Both times you find the Hebrew people leaving their land and going to a foreign land, a place that's not their home. And they have to stay there for a very long time. In both stories, whether it is Jacob with Laban or Jacob's family prospering for 400 years in Egypt, those lands were blessed by the Hebrew people and their hard work. In both stories, you find that in one, a person is treated as a slave, and in the other, the people actually do become slaves. And that it is God who sees their plight and takes them out of a foreign land on a journey into the land that is called their home. And that is the story of us today. We are strangers in a strange land. This is not our home. Last week I talked about common grace and spoke about how where we are called to be a light to the culture around us. We are called, as God blesses us, to turn around and bless the communities around us. It's his kindness that leads us to repentance, his kindness. And that's exactly where we are today. This is not our home, but we're called to make it like our home, to bless the people around us. But there will come a day at the sound of a trumpet where we hear basically those words, arise, and not go, but arise, and get up here. Won't that be awesome? And on that day, he will take us to a new home. Okay, I love that, and that'll preach. That'll preach. Shadow of the eagle. This is also a story of a manipulative, lying, abusive man. A manipulative, lying, abusive man. And the people that he has manipulated, the people he has been lying to, the people he has cheated, happen to be his son-in-law, his daughters, his grandsons. And God sees this and says, get out of there. Get out of there. When you look at this family that we've been reading about through Genesis, you've heard me say over and over again after I read these stories, like, this is a crazy story. Like, what is going on? In today's terms, we would call that dysfunctional, okay? Very dysfunctional. And the reality is, every family is dysfunctional in some way. There's no perfect family out there. All of us in our families has had good times or bad times. There's always things that don't work quite right. But sometimes within families, the dysfunction can grow to the point that it is completely toxic. And it's not just in families. We have toxic people in our lives. It might be in your family. It might be that you have a spouse that's toxic. You have a parent that's toxic, a sibling or a child that's toxic. It might be a stepmother, a stepfather, a stepbrother. It might be a foster brother. We also know that there are toxic people that we can have in the places we work, whether it's an employer, an employee, a peer. We also see it in the institutions within our country. Toxic men and women who are liars, who manipulate, who cheat, who gaslight and try to rewrite reality the same way that Laban was, trying to point the finger constantly. I mean, did you even catch this? In verse 49, Laban is literally saying, the Lord watch between you and me, Jacob, when we are out of one another's sights. If you oppress my daughters, who was the actual one oppressing the daughters? He was. Or if you take wives besides my daughters, remember the story? Jacob wanted to marry this one, but it was Laban who tricked him into marrying the other one. He's the one who did that. Although no one is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. This guy is gaslighting. This guy is looking at this situation. And this is the crazy thing. I've dealt with toxic people before where I can't figure out, is this person lying and they know they're lying? Or do they actually just see reality this way? They believe that lie. We have toxic people in politics. We have toxic people in school systems, in police departments. That doesn't mean every politician or every teacher or administrator or every police officer. We have toxic leaders in churches today. Toxic leaders in churches who manipulate, abuse. They don't care for the sheep. They care about their own pleasure. What do we do with that? What do we do with that? Because I look at this story and I don't want this to pass by. 21 years of ministry, and some of the worst situations I've had to deal with are people that can't see the toxic person that's in their life. Or if they see it, they won't get out of harm's way. And you've probably heard stories about that, had family members or friends, or you might be there yourself today. Remember that Jesus Christ said this in John 10:10. The thief comes to kill, to steal, to destroy. But I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. And brothers and sisters, just knowing statistics, there are those of you here today that are not experiencing the type of life that Christ wants you to have because of the toxicity that is in your life coming from somebody else. Coming from somebody else. I want you to have the type of life that can be yours in Christ. In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus said this, and he's talking specifically about abusive, false leaders in the church, but what he said is a description on how to see if somebody is a toxic, manipulative, abusive liar in your life. Matthew 7, verse 15, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown in the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their what? Fruits. Fruits. And you look at this within the church today, and you can, I don't have time to go into all the layers, but you can apply this where you need to apply it. But, if you look at the church today, there are pastors who are abusive, they're toxic, they're manipulative. Here, Jesus calls them false prophets, and he says, look at their fruit. What is the type of fruit to look at? Unfortunately, today, especially in non-denominational, independent Christian churches, we tend to look at certain things that we consider fruit, like how big is the church, right? In fact, in church growth areas, they call them the 3 Bs. Bucks, money, baptisms, and butts in the seats, right? The 3 Bs, bucks, baptisms, and butts in the seats. One of those is actually pretty good. How many people are coming to Christ? Like, how many people are coming to Christ? You look at the fruit. And so many times when you see toxic people exposed, it might look at first, and I'd say a lot of times it looks like they're successful, like things are going well. And if you read their resume, you'd be like, wow. But how many beat up, hurt, wounded, and dead bodies are in their wake? How many hurt, beat up, and dead bodies are in their wake? And right now, some of you know exactly what I'm talking about because you've experienced it. Look at the fruit that is the true fruit of the gospel. Is the Holy Spirit in their life in such a way where there is a love, a joy, a peace, a patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control? Did I get them all? All right, got a thumbs up from Ken. You challenged me a year ago to actually memorize that. Yeah, you look at that. Is that what they exhibit towards people? Is that what's happening? Are they serving people? Are they actually bringing life? Brothers and sisters, if you have somebody in your life that is like a vampire, they just are sucking the life out of you. Can I make a really good suggestion? Arise and go. Arise and go. It might be that you need to get completely out of the area. It might be like in this story, they had to go completely to a different land. Or it might be that, you know what? I need to get several feet away from them. This person can still be in my life, but I've got to put up some boundaries and some guardrails because they're sucking the life right out of me. And I'm not living the life that I could live. I bet that in here today are people that, you're even wondering, am I that person? Am I that person? Years ago, I was in my dad's office when we got news that my uncle died. He was a toxic man. He was an addict who fried his brain on drugs. Anytime someone says I went to UC Berkeley in the 60s, you got to wonder. He was an alcoholic. He was a felon. And it was one of those moments where when I found out he died, I was like, praise Jesus. Not because it was praise Jesus, I'm glad that man is gone, but because I saw this man who could be so toxic, but it was this cycle. When he was in his right mind, he loved the Lord and he regretted things and he would repent, and he was a man of the word, and he was a man who would pray for people and cared for people. But when he was not in his right mind, look out. He struggled with the demons in his life so bad, his flesh, his addictions, a mental illness, and all these things. But when I found out that he passed away, I was like, you know what? I think he's with the Lord. When he was in his right mind, he knew and he was humbled and he wanted to be with the Lord. But now he doesn't have to deal with the sins of his flesh. There is hope for you if you're here and you look at your life and there's dead bodies behind you. There is hope for you. Brothers and sisters, if you want to talk more about this, this is something where you're like, this affects me. I'm in this boat somewhere. I'll meet with you. I'll pray for you. I'll encourage you. Then I'll help you find a counselor. Because quite frankly, you need someone who can sit with you and listen to you and help you as you go on this journey. Hear my heart today. I want you to have the type of life that Christ wants you to have. Lord.